Hello, welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
And this is our podcast where we read you Harry Potter fan fiction while the baby naps.
Yep.
So we're going to try to get as much as we can in.
I was wondering why you were saying it so quickly.
I hope y'all had a good Labor Day. So, this TikTok that she sent me was a man wrapped in the most beautiful burrito blanket I have ever seen.
It looked so warm and comfortable.
We're probably going to have to get them.
Yeah.
But he said that the twins had the Marauders map during Harry's first year, which, realistically, they did, since they said they've had it for several years when they gave it to him in third year. He was saying that, why didn't they see Tom Riddle or Voldemort on the map when he was attached to Quirrell? And people are all like, because he was a spirit, but you can see the ghosts. So my headcanon is that is the reason why Fred and George charmed snowballs to bounce off the back of Quirrell's turban because he had two people attached to him on the Marauders map. Also, we had no idea who the fuck Tom Riddle was at that point, so that could be why they didn't know who it was. But they're like, who the fuck's Tom Riddle, and why is he living in this turban?
True, they were probably like, Professor Quirrell's got weird things going on with him. We don't know who this guy is, but let's throw some snowballs at him. This is Chapter 15, Hogsmeade. Lily had no small apprehensions about the coming year. Sometimes things were fine, normal, and happy, but there were moments where she felt overwhelmed by the simplest task. There were times where she felt that the ghosts were haunting her, times when the memories of her family welled up so powerfully that she could barely breathe, and then there were many, many times when she was seized by a gripping, irrational fear of the coming end of this year, not the end of December and the start of the new calendar year, but the end of June, the end of the school term, her time at Hogwarts. Since the end of her 6th year, a realization had been bubbling in the back of her mind that this was her last year in school, that she'd already finished her last summer as a Hogwarts student. Next summer, she'd be done with it all, finished out in the real world, looking for a job and losing the loose contact she had with wizards at school. A part of her life was ending, and she didn't feel prepared for it.
See, I don't think you would. I think you'd have more now contact with the people in school during that first summer outside of school because you're all looking for jobs. You're all trying to, there's 4 jobs you can have in the wizarding world. You're all going to end up at the ministry together.
Probably.
Or at St. Mungo's.
Yep.
Or an Auror training.
Still the ministry.
Still the ministry.
Also, now have a question. So she got made head girl.
Yes.
Does that mean that Dumbledore also has to pick a new prefect to replace her, since she was the prefect for her 7th year class?
I don't know. Because
I would assume that he would have to pick a new prefect.
Well, she's in charge of all of the prefects now.
Yes, but that would leave her house short at least one prefect. Because she's in charge of all of the prefects for the entire castle.
That's true.
And if she's not a prefect she's still a prefect, but she's got a lot of other duties now, I'm assuming.
But that means each house has 6 prefects.
I don't feel like that's unreasonable.
No, I don't think it is unreasonable either. But you don't think a house could handle only having 5, especially Ravenclaw? I mean, I feel like Gryffindor's going to need a new prefect.
I feel like Ravenclaw could handle it, but I feel like what if it's just standard procedure, whoever got promoted from prefect to head position now gets replaced with a new prefect.
Right, but wouldn't you be kind of pissed? As a 7th year, all of a sudden you're prefect for just this 7 year. Now you finally have access to all these fancy shit. What about if it's just the Quidditch captain? Because the Quidditch captain has prefect privileges anyways.
Maybe, but at the same time, I feel like if I didn't get prefect and then all of a sudden in 7th year you got prefect, I don't feel like I'd be mad about it. Because clearly I was the backup, second choice.
Right.
And Lily's better. You still get to put that on your resume, and
that's true.
You were still a prefect, even though it was only for a year. You were still a prefect.
That's true. Yeah, because I would think they'd want to replace that prefect.
I would assume that they would want to replace the prefect.
But they didn't replace the prefect when Percy became head boy.
I mean, they might have. They might have just never.
That's true, because Harry's as observant as a brick wall.
Because literally, we only know that Percy was a prefect and that Ron and Hermione were prefects.
That's true.
We don't know any of the other ones in between.
That is very true. Like, we don't know who the prefects were Fred and George's year.
Nope.
Because it clearly was not Fred, George, or Lee.
No. It's not any of them. So there had to be other students and other prefects. Lily had no idea what she wanted to do with her life. None. She expected that if aura training went well, she might go for that, perhaps teaching, maybe she'd get a job at ministry, who knew? She certainly didn't. And that was a bit of a problem for Lily, who liked to have plans for her future. However, unfortunately, though she was head girl and got good marks, top marks really, in all of her classes, she didn't know that she really enjoyed any of it enough to attempt to make it a career out of it. Sure, she liked potions and everything, but what was she going to do, open an apothecary or something? Even worse than her worries about her career was the thought that she'd never again have the life that she did now, that she'd become an adult and be expected to own her own flat and pay for her own food and clothes and electricity and everything. Of course, that was only if she intended to live in a muggle flat. She supposed with the magic, living would be a bit less expensive. After all, you wouldn't charge you for things that you could produce yourself. Could they? Still, this wasn't the point. The point was, school had been a part of her life for so long. Well, it was almost like that's all she knew. She could, of course, end up having to go to more school, especially if she intended to become an Auror. But still, it wouldn't be Hogwarts. Hogwarts wasn't so much a school at times. It was a way of life. It was her second home. She'd changed and grown and experienced so much since she'd first walked through its doors that it seemed very sad to have to leave.
I'm sorry. I know I didn't go to a boarding school, but I was not that attached to my high school.
I wasn't attached to even my college, where I lived there the majority of the year.
Okay. Because I didn't go to college, so I don't know what that feeling is.
And to be fair, my college started out as a cult, so...
How have I never heard that story before?
Oh, yeah. So they don't do it so much anymore because the presidents have changed, but starting out at my college, you had to go for a brief summer orientation where, they, taught you all these songs and, showed you where different classes would be and, kind of, just got you into, kind of what it was going to be like.
Shut up.
So then you moved in a whole week before any of the other students as a freshman. And during that week, you would learn where things were. Keep in mind, this wasn't a big campus. There were, maybe 10 buildings on the entire campus.
Jesus Christ.
You showed up the week early, you learned all these songs, you did all these activities, so we had actual songs that, by the end of orientation, you didn't need that sheet anymore. You were indoctrinated. And, it wasn't that was the only time you ever sang them, because at any big event, you would all sing these songs.
One of them is called Hail Elmira.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
Oh, no. You were in a cult.
I was in a cult. Welcome back. It's a different day.
Because we got too into a cult conversation.
Yeah.
Halfway through this episode, so hello.
Hi. It's literally a week later.
That's what happens when you start talking mid-episode and then you go, oh no, we have to pause this and talk for half an hour to an hour about the cult you joined while going to college.
Yes.
By going to college.
To be fair, just to clarify, I didn't join a cult. I went to college, and that college happened to be a cult.
Yes. That is clarification necessary.
Lily hated uncertainty. She'd always been fond of surprises. What? She hated uncertainty, but she's fond of surprises?
They're the same thing.
She'd always been fond of surprises when they came in the form of presents and such, but nasty shocks like the one she'd received this summer no longer served any place in her life. She expected she would still be in touch with James after school, as her mom happened to be living in Potter's Cottage now. Well, not just Lily's mom, it was Lily too. So there was really no escaping James' factor in her life.
Well, no shit, Sherlock.
Not that she wanted to, of course. And of course, she would keep in touch with Melody and Mimi and Sirius and Remus and Peter as well, as they were all friends of James, of course. Remus and Peter weren't as close to James as Sirius, nor were they as close to Lily, but still, Remus was very nice, and Peter certainly wasn't the most unpleasant individual, although admittedly he wasn't the shiniest wand in the shop. He tended to be very easily impressed, but still, she'd expected she'd still be in contact with all of them after school ended. But what about all the others? The people that she knew and liked and saw every day simply because she was in their house or had class with them? What about Matt and Susie and Alice from Hufflepuff and, hell, even Arabella and Mundungus? And people like Wendy and Lynn? Would she still see them? Would she owl them? Would she ever talk to them again?
Yes, because there's only 4 jobs in the wizarding world.
Uncertainty ruled Lily's life, and she hated it. At least this is certain, she mumbled, staring down at her potions homework. The potions they'd begun for 7th year were extremely exacting and nitpicky. In short, the kind Lily loved most. They required skill, thought, and attention. Some might call them tedious, but Lily personally saw them as a challenge, and one that she was prepared to meet. After all, if you could get one of these potions right, you could get anything right. And Lily liked having that confidence. It was important to her to have confidence in her schoolwork these days, when her confidence in so much else was completely shattered. The ministry, for example. Not to cast aspersions on James's father, but it didn't appear the ministry was going to be able to do much of anything to contain Voldemort threat. It also wasn't clear to the public what the ministry was attempting to do to combat Voldemort, or in fact, if they were attempting to do anything at all. Newspapers and magazines like the Daily Prophet were being heavily censored by the ministry, and those that weren't being controlled were printing stories too ridiculous to believe. The Quibbler had received newfound fame and glory for being the first publication in Britain to declare itself completely uncensored. To reassure the public of the validity of its claim, the magazine printed a full article of complete toss about the Minister of Magic posing some ridiculous allegations involving deadly weapons fashioned from fizzing whizbees, an army of house elves, and a list of minister scandals mostly relating to deep-sea tuna fishing. James had read the article concerning his father and then happily gathered up every last copy of it he could and used them all to warm the fireplace. James didn't care what people had to say about himself, the growing threat of war, or the ministry in general, but when it came to his father, he was very touchy. Lily strongly suspected that his attitude was connected somehow to the events this summer, but she hadn't ever asked about it. In the past, James had ignored any ridiculous statements about his father, but now, for some reason, it mattered. Everything lately seemed to matter more. Lily sighed and returned her mind to her potions homework. She didn't have time to think about what mattered and what didn't. That just gave her a headache. She needed to get through this essay and work on some arithmetic problems, and for once, get some sleep. Despite her brand new, secluded sleeping quarters, one of the many perks of being head girl, she hadn't been able to get much sleep lately.
That is like my favorite fan fiction trope. That there's like a special
head girl
dorm. Boy dorm.
Maybe her mind was troubled, or maybe she wasn't getting enough exercise. Maybe it was because she was spending too many nights up late studying. Maybe it was the late night meetings with James and secret school passageways that were mostly responsible for her loss of sleep. But more likely than not, it was the nightmares that warded her away from the realm of subconsciousness. Mimi Ramirez, while attempting to do her homework in the library, fell victim to a wet dog look of Sirius Black, having just come in from Quidditch practice, dripping wet. He did not attempt to foist his wetness on his girlfriend. Instead, he simply sat beside her, letting all of the water drip off his robes and create a friendly little puddle on the floor. Thankfully, Madame Prince was nowhere to be seen. Or she could have whipped out her wand and chased Sirius halfway to Denmark by now. "You're late," Mimi informed him, "and I'm trying to study." "I'm only a little late, and you're only half studying." "You're an hour late, and I'm studying very hard. Thank you very much." "Of course you are," Sirius said, snatching her book away. "In what year did Godric Gittleby claim he found the 13th use for dragon's blood?" 1934, Mimi said, looking bored, but his research was discredited when a review board determined that his workings with the 13th use of dragon blood were nearly the same as Dumbledore's working with the 3rd use of dragon's blood. "Damn, you're good. Can I have my book back now, please?" "No, I want to ask you another one." Mimi sighed and sat back in her chair as Sirius fired a round of questions at her, all of which she answered correctly. Then, dumbfounded, Sirius handed her book back. "When did you get so smart?" Sirius asked, and Mimi hit him with a book. "I've always been smart, Sirius Black. Thank you very much." Well, yeah, but now you're smarter than me." "You say that like it's hard to accomplish or something," Mimi teased. And Sirius glared at her and shook his head everywhere, spraying water droplets. Mimi emitted a small eek and hid behind her book. "What's the matter? It's just a little water," Sirius said innocently. "And you're just a little muddy, dear. Mud never hurt anyone." "No, but it made them smell. Do I smell?" "A bit. Damn, I should fix that." "There's a capital idea," Mimi said a bit distractedly as she was attempting to return to her studies. In all honesty, she didn't like to study, and she hadn't much before this year, except for owls. There was something about Sirius that just infuriated her enough to hit the books and show him up in something. He was brilliant, incredibly brilliant, without trying, and at times made Mimi feel a bit slow. Which she didn't appreciate, and it wasn't something he did on purpose. He, and James for that matter, were just smart without having to work at it. James ran into Sirius at the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, and they both walked in and plopped themselves down in chairs by the fire to dry off. "How are things with you and Lily?" Sirius asked, spreading his cloak out on the floor. James shrugged, not bothering to lay out his cloak. "She's obsessed with studying, Padfoot, what can I say?" "That's what you get for trying to date the head girl." "Well, at least I'm not just dating someone to..." James cut himself off. He'd been about to say make someone else jealous. The problem with this was the whole concept was beginning to bother James, in no small part because it had been his suggestion in the first place. "Yeah," Sirius said, slumping into his seat a bit. "At least you're not like me." "Oh, come on, Padfoot. It's not as bad as all that." Sirius stared at the flames for a few moments before responding. "What if it is prongs?" James didn't respond. After a few minutes, Sirius shook his head. "Sometimes I think I'm the worst guy in the world. Going out with some girl, trying to get another one. But sometimes I'm with Mimi and I'm trying to be good to her and I feel like she's not even thinking about me. It's weird, isn't it? Not like you and Lily." "What do you mean, not like me and Lily?" James demanded. "Oh, shut up, Prongs. You know exactly what I mean. It doesn't matter if you're dating officially or not. When you two are together, well, you're together. You're not thinking about other people." "How do you know that?" "Do you have to be such a prat about everything? I'm telling the truth and you know it, so just accept it, why don't you?" James mumbled something in response and shook his head. When Sirius didn't speak, he said, "I don't know, Padfoot. Sometimes I just feel like Lily doesn't care as much as I do." Sirius looked ready to strangle James. "You're an idiot. The girl is crazy about you, and she's yours. Don't waste your time with her worrying about how she bloody feels." He shook his head at James one last time before stalking upstairs to the boys' dormitories. James sat by the fireplace for a few minutes, feeling stupid before trudging up to bed. Melody had got into the habit of curling her hair. It wasn't so much that she liked it that way as it was that Sirius liked it that way, and she was trying to infuriate him. It wasn't fair, she knew, to make herself stunning just to make Sirius jealous, especially when she had no intention of pursuing a relationship with him. Plus, there were the minor details of Sirius having a girlfriend, but never mind that. Melody was feeling too selfish at the moment to care.
"Melody, tell your goddamn friends what is going on. They will support you."
1,000%.
Aye.
She looked at the glass and stared at herself for a moment before shaking her head at herself. Her reflection was no longer mirrored who she was. During the past few months, she'd begun to shed the fake Melody, the one she'd been around her uncle, and find the real Melody, the one she'd been around her friends, although Sirius had been the first to point out how fake Melody had become. The first person to invoke a change in the fake Melody had been, in fact, Paulo. Now, however, Melody was neither real nor fake. She didn't know what to make of herself. She spent hours every day primping. She curled her hair, plastered on her makeup. By the time she finished with this ordeal, she had very little time left to dress herself stylishly, though really there wasn't much to be done with school uniforms. Melody had never felt so shallow in all her life. There were, however, ego boosters that kept the superficiality going. The way Sirius's eyes bulged out when he saw her, the male eyes she could feel following her as she walked into the great hall, the dozens of offers she'd gotten for escorts on the first Hogsmeade weekend of the year, the knowledge that she was, by most counts, the prettiest girl in school, only fueled her desire to be as stunning as possible. Perhaps the more guys drooled over her, the more jealous Sirius would be. If he even cared. He told you he cared!
He freaking loves you!
In all theory, Melody knew Sirius should care. He'd told her mere weeks ago that he was crazy about her. Didn't that count for anything? He practically overnight decided, screw overnight, more like over the course of a few hours, decision to date Mimi was suspicious at best. Melody occasionally wondered if Sirius was dating Mimi to simply infuriate Melody.
He is.
However, it was impossible to tell as Sirius rarely talked to her anymore.
Because you broke his heart.
This hurt in more ways than one. Melody felt the emotional pain of Sirius's avoidance as well as the physical ache that she got from occasionally missing him so much, but no one but herself knew these pains. She hadn't discussed them with Lily, as Lily was still operating under the infuriating conviction that teenagers were not capable of being in love. Melody strongly suspected that this was because Lily was still thinking of love in the storybook fashion, the I fell in love with you at first sight and now we're going to live happily ever after fashion. That simply didn't exist in the real world. Melody believed that love was not hard to come by and that falling in love didn't take very much. However, in Melody's world, it was also fickle and was equally easy and equally possible that one should fall out of love as one should fall in love. Nothing on either end was likely to be permanent. Lily seemed like the kind of person who believed in everlasting love, which Melody strongly suspected had to do with her religion. What? Lily's religion was relatively new and unusual aspect of her personality. Melody had always known in some corner of her mind that Lily used to go to church every week, and had, when she first come to Hogwarts, prayed every night. Over the years, that seemed to have dissipated. But now, it seemed Lily's faith had renewed. Melody saw her friend saying grace before she ate, and praying whenever she was feeling particularly depressed about the family deaths that she was still dealing with. Melody didn't quite know what to make of it. Wizards as a whole were not particularly religious. This may have had something to do with the fact that none of the major world religions produced any explanation whatsoever for magic. There were those, of course, who attempted to begin wizarding religions, but those usually ended up as cults, whose members eventually got involved in many highly suspicious religious activities that sooner or later turned out to be illegal. As a result, those wizards who wished to participate in religion at all generally chose whatever was prevalent in their home country, in English case, Christianity. Please hold. Alright, we got our friend. All of the deeply religious wizards Melody had come across were Muggle-born. However, it was entirely possible that there were deeply religious purebloods as well. Melody did not know. She had not met every wizard. Melody's mind spun back, trying to figure out how her thoughts had drifted off to religion. She stared in the mirror blankly at herself. She didn't look like Melody Caldwell anymore. She looked like a supermodel. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? And Was it at all ironic that she had to ask herself that question? Potions was awkward. Seventh-year Gryffindors and Ravenclaws had class together, and the students did not mesh. The professors considered this highly unusual. Normally, the only classes where students quarreled were the ones with Slytherins. The students, however, were not surprised. Even if Wizarding Britain was in a state of panic, inside Hogwarts, teenage gossip still prevailed.
I mean, that's any high school.
Truth. Everyone knew about Sirius's relationship with Mimi and Melody's severed friendship with the couple. They knew, too, of Lily and James's rapidly progressing relationship and the small rift this had created between Lily and Melody. It seemed natural, therefore, for James and Sirius, the best of friends, to share a potions table with partner with their girlfriends. This left James and Sirius's cohorts, Remus and Peter, to partner together and share a table with James and Sirius's less well-known cohort, Mundungus Fletcher and his girlfriend, Arabella. So it was understood by the general student body why Melody, on the first day of potions, marched to the side of the room opposite her friend and snaked her arm through Adam Johnson's of Ravenclaw and flirted her way to a table with him. It was less understood why, at Sirius and James's lab table, several glass vials were knocked to the floor, but then with Sirius and James, you never did exactly know what was going on. Sirius occasionally allowed himself to be distracted. What? He demanded, attempting to dump an entire jar of worms into his cauldron. Is she doing? What is who doing? James asked, a bit distracted by Lily, who was attempting to shove worms down his robes to get back at the one he'd put in her hair at the beginning of class. Sirius, what are you doing? Mimi shrieked, snatching the worms out of his hands before they fell into the pot. Are you trying to get us in trouble? Oh, it's just a worm, Mimi. It would have been fine. James, do you think that she likes him? Sirius whispered to his friend. James paused and glanced over at Melody and then shook his head. Padfoot, you do know you've got a girlfriend, don't you? Sirius, you heard what Professor Thorne said. If you put in more than 2 worms, the potion will bubble over and stick everywhere, Mimi scolded, dropping 2 worms in and securely fastening the lid over the rest. And if this gets on my new robes, I swear to God, she trailed off, glaring at her boyfriend, who was ignoring her. Yeah, well, but, Sirius began, still talking to James. Well then, forget about Melody and James yelled as Lily successfully shoved a handful of worms down his robes. Lily shrieked in laughter as James jumped around attempting to remove the wriggling creatures from his clothing. Sirius Black, are you even listening to me? Sirius had only a second to register this query before Mimi grabbed his ear and yanked on it, placing it right next to her mouth. Ah! Sirius cried, and Mimi glared at him, unforgiving. Would you like to switch lab partners, Sirius? No. Do you want to fail potions? Not particularly. Well, then pay attention, Mimi commanded, releasing his ear, which Sirius rubbed, feeling annoyed. You're sure an abusive girlfriend. Well, you're an abusive boyfriend. You keep ignoring me. What do you expect? Never-ending love and devotion. Fat chance. Hand me the new extract. You forgot to say the magic word. Hand me the new extract, dumbass. That's not the magic word. Mimi made a noise of irritation and whipped out her wand. Do you want to know what is a magic word? Accio, she cried, and the beaker of new extract flew into her hand, and she turned away from Sirius and began working on the potion again, mixing the new extract and the dragon's blood together in a beaker rather violently. She ignored Sirius's attempts to assist her. James and Lily, meanwhile, had gotten into a bit of a row. James, what did you do with the worms? What, the ones on the lab table or the ones that you shoved on my shirt? Either, I don't care, but we have to put 2 worms in the cauldron. It's in the next minute or the potion won't be any good for anything. What, like it was good for something to begin with? James. Well, maybe if you hadn't shoved the worms down my robe, I'd be a bit more willing to tell you where they are. Oh, for heaven's sakes, it was just a joke. And anyway, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't decided to put one in my hair. Well, fine, if you want the stupid worms, have the stupid worms, James said, and he threw several at her, ignoring the fact that most of them soared past Lily and landed on various people's shoulders and noses instead. Lily, infuriated, picked them up and threw them back. You just put them in the pot. It's your fault that they're not in there in the first place. How is this my fault? James demanded, throwing them back to Lily. It just is, Lily informed him, tossing the worms at James's head. Well, if that's enough. Lily and James, along with most of the class, froze and looked up at Professor Thorne. This is not primary school. If you want to play with the worms, I will gladly send you back. 20 points from each Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Now get to work, he snapped, removing the worms from James and Lily's table before stalking off to the other side of the room. Professor McGonagall heard of the incident in potions, and she was not particularly pleased with the head boy and girl. As such, she detained the way to the Orr training meeting and had a brief word with them about classroom decorum.
I mean, fair enough.
Yeah. When they arrived at the meeting 10 minutes late, they were rather surprised to only see 6 other students in the classroom, along with Professor Dumbledore, Alistair Moody, and a tall, dark, muscular man that Lily didn't recognize. Sorry we're late, she began, apologizing, but Professor McGonagall... Thank you, Miss Evans, Professor Dumbledore said. Minerva informed me that she might be detaining you. I don't wish to be rude, but we have very little time for this particular meeting, so please have a seat. Lily and James took empty seats near Sirius, both still puzzled by the slim number of occupants in the room, from the list of 16 that had been posted at the end of last school year. Only 8 remained, and not by any means were they the combination of students Lily would have expected. Where's Melody? She hissed at Sirius, and Sirius whispered to her swiftly, I didn't make the final list. Went off in a mad rage. Just before Moody began speaking. Lily turned to Moody for a moment and surveyed the room in wonder. Melody was one of the best duelers Lily knew. How had she failed to make the final cut? Further inspection of the remaining students revealed that only 2 were present from each house. It almost made sense to Lily why James and Sirius had been picked over Melody, but not quite. Present from Lily's own house was Adam Johnson. Hufflepuff boasted Frank Longbottom and Naomi Collins, and Slytherin sported 2 of its most disagreeable members, Vivian Horvath and Sally Parkins. However, Lily supposed Vivian and Sally were better than Lucius and Severus, both of whom failed to make the final cut.
Woohoo!
She slowly turned back to reality and attempted to register Moody's words. She was lost entirely. The other parts of the session you'll spend with Fletcher Hawkes at the ministry. She assumed Fletcher Hawkes was the tall man standing next to Moody. You'll all have your meetings before the session with the same groups, so make sure you copy down the right dates. When we read off the list, groups are as followed. Group 1, you'll have to give yourself a code name, which you can decide your first meeting. Potter, Johnson, Horvath, Longbottom. Group 2, Evans, Parkins, Black, Collins. He reeled off a list of dates, only about half of which Lily managed to copy down, and half of those she was sure were for the wrong group. Oh well, maybe Sirius had been paying attention. Lily glanced over and saw Sirius and James passing a piece of parchment covered back and forth, covered with insane scribbles. She could only assume were words. Perhaps it had been a stretch to think that Sirius had been paying attention. Maybe Naomi Collins had gotten all the dates down? Lily made a mental note to ask after the meeting. Moody surrendered the slip of parchment to Dumbledore and turned back to the students. We're done here. Pay attention the next meeting. If you lose focus like that as an Auror, you'll be dead. With that, Moody left, followed by the tall, mysterious Hawkins, who hadn't said a word. Well, it looks like we're going to stop this chapter here.
Yeah. I hope everybody had a wonderful Labor Day. We're recording this end half on Labor Day.
Yes. All right. Any last thoughts?
I think that's it for me.
All right, then we will see you guys next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on our journey through the trapdoor.
You can leave us a review on Facebook or Apple Podcasts. It would literally mean the world to us.
Or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at thetrapdoor16.
Or if you have any longer thoughts, you can shoot us an email at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.